They all suggest 3 to 8 months. It's all relative to the person's need. When I'm driving on the street here and the guy's literally got a few coins in his hand, that's his emergency money, that's his necessity for the day. But we have to expand upon this. Not everyone's got the luxury of having a nice, fat, juicy bank account. But we've got to think like squirrels. The squirrel thinks very cleverly. He puts his nuts away in the summer because you know there's going to be a winter. Most people don't have that mentality. They spend for today, they don't save for tomorrow. And you get all these sort of crazy things that happen in the world. You know, you're sitting in Cyprus and suddenly your bank account's frozen. So, you know, risk is all over the place. So my suggestion to people when I do retirement planning or when I do investment planning is you actually have to sit down and have a plan. And the plan must require discipline, perseverance, and time. And most people generally are ill-equipped or don't have the time. They're time poor to put a proper plan in place. So I think the key area is discipline, having a plan.
Okay, now the role of the access bond then, because I mean, sure you look at your clients and a lot of their personal wealth or personal balance sheet sits around the value in the property, the equity that supposedly sits in their property.
Absolutely.
And they use the access bond as essentially their reserve money. Do you advocate that approach?
Absolutely. I think the access bond, look, it has its negative consequences. You go and then suddenly the shoe's there, and you know what happens with your clients. They want to get hold of that money. So there's that let us lead not into temptation. They want to get hold of that money. So sometimes people need forced savings like retirement annuities, etc. Think of it as emergency money for one day when you get old. But yeah, it depends on how liquid that money is, and it's all about managing cash flow over time. Short-term money, medium-term money, long-term money. I think emergency money could be roughly classified as short-term money, necessity money. And yes, as you've alluded to, it doesn't really earn you good returns, unless you're buying maybe gold coins and speculating a little bit at the same time.
But how realistic is this conversation we're having now when many South Africans are up to their eyeballs in debt, that they can begin, you know, thinking about saving? And so let's compare the number of South Africans that really have emergency funds as against, you know, South Africans who are trying to actually crawl out of a hole they've already dug for themselves. Would you be able to give some insights on that, Kathy?
Sure. Well, first of all, if you say to yourself, I can't afford an emergency fund, actually the opposite is true. You can't afford not to have it. Wanga.com did a really, really interesting survey, and they found that 45% of the loans that people made were for unexpected and sudden expenses. So if it's a sudden expense and you take the first loan you get, you're probably not shopping around for the best interest rates, the best terms and conditions, and so the vicious cycle of debt just starts, and you just get deeper and deeper and deeper. The FSB also, round about last year or the year before, commissioned a study, and the findings were horrible. Less than 1/3 of South Africans have even got 3 months worth of income saved up.
I want to latch onto that, and maybe Danae, you can give us insights here. Because growing up, I always grew up with my mother in a number of stokvels, and she was always contributing, and most of the time stokvels were for two reasons: either because when somebody passes, there should be money to take care of that, and Christmas, because it has to be a big party around Christmas time. Are we recognizing the informal mechanisms of emergency funds?
I think to a certain extent, yes, but I also think we need to approach it differently. You know, when I think about when I first started working, there was no one to tell me at that time, when I had no debt and I had no obligations, to say, just put 10% of your salary aside. And had I started then, I'd be much further. Instead, I did. You know, I went out and I could suddenly buy clothes, I could get things on credit, and that's the first thing I did. I bought clothes to look nice at work. And, you know, before I knew it, I was in the cycle. And it had to take a lot of discipline to say to myself, I actually need to stop, because I was headed, you know, in the wrong direction, and I could see that I'd end up in a very big mess. So it's very important to sort of get people, in as much as there are those, you know, stokvels, social structures. I don't know anything about stokvels, so for me, a savings account makes sense. And for all other young people who we're no longer in those kind of environments that, you know, give us the platform to have stokvels. So we need to take our own financial responsibility into our own hands and be disciplined.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll jump into a bit of an anecdotal example. So last week, it was obviously just before payday, and the Monday, my debit card got swallowed, and my bank card my credit card got sent to the wrong branch. I suddenly found I've got $300 in my wallet. And so I go into the bank and I say, please can I get a new card, and just fill in this form, and of course it's the end of the month, so it's a disaster. And so my 10-year-old comes to me and he says, but what's an overdraft? Because we're talking about the discussion about overdraft. And he says, but he doesn't understand this thing, because I give him X amount of pocket money. He doesn't get an overdraft. So why should an adult be entitled to an overdraft? And he said, you've got 300 Rand, make it last to the end of make it last until payday, and then you can go and you can get money
How
again.
many days away were you from payday?
4 days away from payday. There were a lot of 2-minute noodles chucked into there. But the point was, and I think Danae has touched on something, it becomes a habit that you need to be able to, you need these habits instilled. And if my 10-year-old can tell me there's no purpose to an overdraft, then I as a grown adult should also know those things. And I think that this whole thing about personal financial responsibility is so important, and it doesn't get communicated often enough. And I mean, I think if you look at Glacier clients, the clients that have done well for themselves, and I mean your own clients, Alexander, they're clients that have got a good appreciation of what money is. They know that you spend less than you earn. It's a very simple concept, and yet we still don't seem to be able to communicate it. Kathy, I mean, maybe some insight?
Yeah, and whether it's a formal or an informal saving structure, just getting into the habit of saving is critical. And getting into the habit of doing it early, and paying yourself first. Make your savings a debit order or whatever off of your salary. Alex and I were chatting in the green room before about the value of advice and the studies that have been done showing the difference. Those who have a professional guiding them along the way, showing them where to save, how much to save, and so on. We briefly touched on how much is enough. Well, that's where you need a financial advisor, and Glacier only works with registered brokers and advisors. Your broker or advisor would look at your specific circumstances. There's a guy called Dave Ramsey who wrote a book, and it's widely regarded as one of the top 10 financial handbooks. And he said before you even have an emergency fund, you must have $1,000, which loosely converted as 10,000 Rand, then start on your emergency plan. But you need to ask yourself, with your advisor's help, do I have a home? If it's an old home, a lot more can go wrong. Ditto for a car. What sort of employment do I have? Am I in a job where if I become unemployed, I'm lucky enough, I'll be snapped up immediately, or I go for months without employment? Then the harsh reality is you have to have that many months of emergency fund to cover your loss of income.
Final comments from you, Alex?
I think we've missed the real key issue here for South Africans is we need an education system that includes financial planning. Simple as that. Everyone around this room learned English, biology, science. They don't learn about managing finance. We cannot move ahead without that. Yes, you can have a financial planner, deal in the top end of the market, but unless we take the average man, Joe, from the street and people like the blogging sites and take them to the next level, we're going to have a massive savings crisis in this country.
And those are the final words from Alex, saying that we cannot move forward without financial planning as a core part of the South African curriculum. Thanks again to my guest, Kathy Lammers from Glacier by Sanlam, Alexandra Babbage of Alexandra Babbage and Associates, and Dino Tsamela from D on Money ZA. Time now for Befriend the Trend. In this week's Befriend the Trend, we look at the switching economy. Now, Mark, from what I understand from that, I'm thinking we're looking at sectors that are hot and sectors that are not. Am I on the money?
Not quite. It's actually an interesting term. I hadn't heard about it until last week. So essentially the switching economy is the ability of the consumers to be able to switch from A to B. And I think South Africans' best example would be banks. You know, it's hard work to actually switch from bank to bank. It's gotten easier over the last couple of years. But essentially, Accenture have done this report, and they reckon the so-called switching economy is worth $5.9 trillion a year.
Would this include like telecommunications?
Cell phone providers, retailers, clothing manufacturers, hotels, etc. An interesting stat that here, 51% of US consumers switched service providers in the past year due to poor customer service.
Right.
And I think it's a very interesting trend, because I think it is very easy now to switch your service providers. I think there's a lot of consumer legislation in place that stops you being tied into particular services, particular service providers. If you don't like it, you can switch. And I think that if South Africans are serious, well, corporates in general are serious about it, they need to understand customer service comes first. good systems, and you've just got to be able to take responsibility and ownership of that customer.
Are we finding that corporates in South Africa are responding favorably, that they're upping their value proposition to the customer to stop them from switching?
Look, I think for a lot of businesses in South Africa, I mean, I saw a fantastic stat the other day. Woolworths, in 2002, the Woolworths share price was worth R3.80. Today it's worth R77. So over the last 10 years, corporates have done fantastically well. There's the black middle class has come through, boosted their earnings. They've been able to be quite greedy with what they've got, and I think it reflects in corporate profits. Last 5 years, we've probably started to see a bit of the fallout from the global financial crisis, and people fight for their customers. There are no easy customers out there anymore, and your business has to be geared to protect them.
So clearly, corporates should be befriending the trend and making sure they're mitigating that outflow of customers to their competitors.
Correct. It's easy to switch. Look after it.
It's easy to switch. Look after it. That's Marc Ashton. Now, we're going to take a short ad break, but when we return, market research tips for entrepreneurs. See you right after this. Welcome back. Now, with the failure rate of small businesses in South Africa dismally high, Finweek thought it would be interesting to ask the experts just how important is it to do thorough market research before embarking on a new venture or launching a new product. At the desk, we have Kristia van Heerden, Finweek.com editor, Professor Karl van Aert, research director at UNISA's Bureau of Market Research, and we also have Donald Mokoena, business advisor for Cedar's Tshwane branch. Thank you again for everyone coming back to the desk. Perhaps let's come to you first, Karl. Oftentimes you'll see articles that will say that without market research, a business is doomed to failure. Is this doom and gloom a reflection of the truth?
Yes, absolutely. We've been doing quite a lot of tracking studies where we've been conducting research on businesses from startup as they actually age. And what we found, for example, is that when you look at businesses surviving from year 0 to 1, from 1 to 2, 2 to 3, etc., for every year that they survive, there are different reasons why they fail. But we found, for example, that especially from year 0 to year 1, the main reason for businesses failing is that they don't prepare good operational plans, business plans, marketing plans, and financial plans.
Karl, maybe I get the sense that there's a very poor sense of qualitative and quantitative research when people start their businesses.
Yeah.
The idea of research is I ask 5 people around a table over a couple of beers and say, I'm going to go and I'm going to start a business doing this. Is it a good idea? And everyone, of course, says, yes, it's a fantastic idea. There's just going to be a natural bias to it. Do you think that most people who start their businesses actually have an appreciation of what real quantitative and real qualitative research actually is?
No, they don't, because we actually had a look at how many of those businesses that we've been tracking over the years actually have a business plan, a detailed business plan. It's less than 10%. Of those businesses that do have business plans, quite a lot of them only drafted those business plans because the banks, etc., required them. And we actually saw that they were lying to themselves in those business plans, and that it wasn't really an objective risk analysis. Maybe just on that, just to explain what market research actually entails and what should be done, if I may. Okay. In any market analysis, you've basically got 3 components. You've got to have an understanding of the demand out there and the structure of demand. And quite a lot of businesses actually don't go out and actually determine what is the spending power, what, for example, are the expenditure needs of client out there. Then you've got the supply side, trying to understand, for example, what can you produce? How efficiently can you produce that? What is your competitors? But then comes the most basic part, that quite a lot of businesses do understand supply and demand to some extent. But the most important part is the interface between supply and demand. For example, understanding what you'll be contributing in a unique way. For example, what will be your competitive advantage. And the bulk of businesses don't understand that. Also, on the tracking studies that we found, those businesses that do survive the first year, during that latter part of the first year, they start designing new business plans, and often that's a strong predictor of longer term survival.
Donald, I want to jump in there. You look at your entrepreneurs that are within the Cedar universe, essentially. Do they have the resources to be able to do proper market research when they're putting together the businesses? And if so, what are the ways that they're getting around? How are they actually going through the research process?
Yeah, actually what we do at Cedar, we assist our small businesses to come up with market research. We conduct our own analysis first, and then we'll determine to say, okay, this is the particular client that needs assistance with market research. Then we also facilitate and assist them in terms of capacitating them in terms of being able to undertake and do their own market research. That in itself will, in the later stage, assist them to do their own rather than to rely on outside people to be able to do those researches.
Carl, is it ever too late to do your market research? I mean, if you start as an entrepreneur, you start by yourself, you don't really think it through.
No.
Now you're 3 years into your business. Is it too late now to do your market research?
It's never too late. What we've actually found is that quite a lot of businesses actually start up either not with a business plan or with a weak one. They really struggle. And during those struggles, they tend to find a niche for themselves or possible competitive advantage, and then actually draw up detailed business plans of how to realize that. But it's never too late.
I want to go to the end process after the data has been collected and the analysis has been done, Donald. How do entrepreneurs deal with the findings if the findings say it's a no-go area? So they spent all this time putting effort into market research and refining the idea, but what the analysis is that this is not such a good idea. Is it something that they readily accept?
Yeah, I guess having mentioned that, it should be noted that, market research that has been undertaken, the aim thereof is to determine and to measure the potential sales that may be derived from that particular market. That's one. Two, you're also undertaking that to see who are the industry players in that particular market. Who will be your potential buyers? Who will be your sellers? What are the market trends in that particular industry? And so on. What are the regulatory requirements that you may need in order to be tapping into that particular market? And all that information, after it has been gathered, it should actually be viewed and assessed in an objective manner. If it needs to be adjusted, that market research, let it be adjusted. If it says it's a no-go area, you may discard it and start something else, because it's not a matter of saying you have to stick to it by virtue of having maybe invested money onto that particular market research.
But how important is it to have actually worked in the industry that you're researching? Because I think that, if I've worked in publishing all my life and I decide I now want to start a tracking company, it's easy for me to go and pull the Imperial financial results and say, look how much money is made in tracking. But unless I've worked in tracking and actually understand the niches of it, I can make my research say whatever it wants to say. How important is that industry experience when you look in and you're talking to the entrepreneurs within your network?
Yeah, I think the assessment, when we look at our entrepreneurs, we assess them both, the type of business that he wants to venture into, and we also look at his personal attributes. Does he possess the necessary skill that is required to venture into the market? Did he work before in that particular industry? Is it a new industry at all? And if we realize that he needs maybe assistance in terms of that, he needs to be capacitated in terms of that, that's when now we take those people through the processes.
Could you maybe give us some advice for a small entrepreneur who is by himself, who wants to do a bit of market research before he goes to see a professional? I mean, people don't often know that, you have the option to see somebody who can help you. What are actual tips that entrepreneurs can use when conducting market research?
Yeah, actually, our offices, I'm from Cedar Tshwane branch. We are accessible to everyone who wants to access that particular assistance. We are running even sessions wherein we tell them what a market research is, how to conduct one. We also give them guidelines to say, this is how you should be, this is the type of information that you should put into the market research. That market research can be viewed later on by a professional, a business advisor who's going to say, you know, we are on the right track, you know, we are not on the right track. We can even source external services to say, this needs somebody who's from outside to assist. We can also do that. So the ultimate aim thereof is to capacitate them, because we must also bear in mind that the outcome of a market research, that it looks like a piece of information, but like Prof earlier on mentioned, it is also going to form part of that what you call your business plan later on. You know, it's going to, and also help them as well to be able to come up with their own company profile. All these little bits and bits of information at the end of the day is going to be part of that business.
But Carl, one of my concerns still is when you're actually doing this market research, do you need to be independent? Do you need an independent person? Do you need somebody, the people that are collecting this data? Because you know, as I say, it's easy for me to say trucking, I can make money in trucking, but if I don't know anything about it, by the same token, if I'm not independent, but I've convinced myself that I've worked in the industry and there must be money to be made, how do I form that team that actually does a decent set of research?
No. I would very strongly recommend that you use an independent person. Just an example of that, we've seen, for example, on your previous question of whether you need to understand a specific industry to be successful. And the answer to that is a definitely yes and a definite no. It's a definite yes that you'll probably succeed if you do it via facilitated entrepreneurship, like, for example, franchising. And what happens with franchising is that you buy into an existing business plan with independent people. But one of the biggest problems with quite a lot of people compiling their own business plans is that quite a lot of them haven't got sufficient skills to be an entrepreneur, they haven't got sufficient business skills, etc., and they're too much involved for themselves. So what often happens if you've got a good independent person, the first thing that person needs to do is to evaluate the entrepreneur to say, can you succeed? What are your own shortcomings?
And we'll leave it on that note of an independent voice. Thanks again to our guests, Professor Karl van Aert from UNISA and Donald Mokoena from CEDA. That's all we have for this week's edition of Finweek Money Matters. Well, and that also means that you must remember that we have a new edition of Finweek, which is available in stores today with a digital copy, also available in English and Afrikaans on mysubs.co.za. A special thanks to my co-hosts, Marc Ashton and Kristia van Heerden, for reining in on the conversations with me. From me, Nozi Pombandra, and the team. We'll see you again next week. Have a good weekend.